My name is Felix Njofi. This is the follow-up of my story. Around the world, people do not really understand what British people are like. It is only when you can watch this video and understand their DNA and understand their identity, you know that they are the most racist, evil human being in the whole universe. I live in Germany and obtained a EU license. Moved to this country, their law, they require me to change the license. I sent the license to exchange. They decided not to exchange the license. Now I took them to court because it did take me 3 years to follow up. They have changed the license now. I want them to pay me. It become another problem. Now the family that are doing all this, they are the same family that was married to Diana, that this set her up to be killed with the French racism system. Now on this video, you'll be able to understand the DNA of racism in this country. This racist family, they are the one that they are turning the whole country against me. It's the same racist family that this set Diana to be killed. Just watch the video and it will help human being that is facing the same problem to be able to fight them out. The only way out with them is to make the whole world know your story. These racists, they want to change the way of human being living in the planet by racism. But we need to stand together to be able to get over that. Thank you.
It's important to note that Dr. Andrews is a regular on the BBC. Oh yes, you heard me right, Dr. Andrews, as he's a professor at Birmingham City University. But can you guess in which subject? I'll give you a second. Tick-tock. Can you think of something? That's right, Black Studies. 10 points to every single one of you. His thoughts and opinions are incredibly slanted, he's a complete ideologue, and frankly, it's the emergence of people like him and the capitulation of the mainstream media who bend over backwards for people like him that is sinking this nation. Look at the articles he's written for The Guardian, The Independent and CNN. He's hyper-focused on what he perceives to be racism, which apparently is everything and everywhere. He constantly bangs the drum of empire, making people feel guilty for something they had nothing to do with, and he endlessly denigrates and trashes Britain as a country and the influence we've had on the world. He fits right in at the BBC then, doesn't he? This headline made me laugh though. Racism is as British as a cup of tea. But hang on. In the previous anti-British BBC abomination I covered on this channel a couple of weeks ago, one of the pundits said this.
The history of any country would be very unexciting if you got rid of immigration. I mean, like, I'm drinking our national drink. That is tea. Tea. Where do you get that from?
China.
China, I would have said, yeah.
Okay.
All the tea in China.
So apparently, tea isn't British after all. God, am I confused. But isn't that the point? All of these people, all these morons, their main goal is to water down British identity to such an extent that it becomes meaningless and unknowable. Well, it's either meaningless or absolutely terrible. Nothing else, nothing positive. Anyway, that made me laugh. Dr. Andrews has also been featured on Newsnight.
British sports stars should take a knee during the national anthem. Racism is so deeply ingrained that it is part of the DNA of the nation. Britain is no different. Every inequality of housing, employment, education and wealth that plagues African Americans is strongly felt by black people in Britain. All of this injustice is the direct legacy of the British Empire that often made its place in the world through genocide, slavery and colonialism. The empire produced a toxic national identity.
And last year he spoke at the Oxford Union.
Racism is at the DNA, is at the heart of this country. We say Britain is, of course Britain is racist, that's the most obvious thing you could ever say. Britain is not only racist, it is built on racism and perpetuates racism on a daily basis, right? The three pillars of this country are genocide, slavery, and colonialism. That's a story you won't hear, but it is the truth. All of the wealth, this wonderfully esteemed place we are in today, is built on genocide, slavery, and colonialism. It is maintained on colonialism. It is maintained on racism.
Yeah, you get the
World in the exploitation of human cargo. This story is not just one of slave raiding by Europeans, but slave trading by Africans. Greed led African kings to sell 12 million people across the ocean. This is not a tale of a trade which grew by accident, but one of a global business created by royal appointment.
The Royal African Company is to be incorporated to set to sea as many ships as shall be thought fitting for the buying, selling and bartering of gold, silver, negroes, slaves.
Nor is it simply the story of passive, suffering Negroes freed by heroic white crusaders, but one of black uprising. And above all, this is not a tale of a dead past. It still shapes the way Britons live today.
William Beckford and his father, Alderman Beckford, to put it bluntly, owned my ancestors.
It brings some Britons face to face with a heritage they've never before confronted.
My grandfather was what I'd consider probably a very charming man, and in his young days he was quite a dish. Actually, he really was.
And for the first time, Britons, black and white, discover a common ancestry. It's an ancestry rooted in a past when British ships carried African slaves. Bristol. This sleepy port was once a mercantile powerhouse which dominated the transatlantic slave trade. Ships that wrenched millions of Africans from their homes crowded the Avon for a century. Yet a visitor today sees a city stripped of any reminder of that cargo. Bristol has turned its back on the trade that made it rich.
I was simply amazed by the fact that there was no recognition that Bristol's wealth lay in the Atlantic trade. In vain I went to the museum, for example, to see whether there was a display there. Not a word of it. I looked at my university and saw whether I was teaching it. Not a bit of it. I talked to people in the street and they were completely ignorant of it. And I think that really in the 20th century, Bristol went through a long period of denial that there really was, as it were, a participation in this wider world.
The city's authorities have long resisted efforts, especially by the black communities, to mark its slave trading past.
There has been a genuine fear in Bristol of what the consequences would be if the truth were known. And part of the fear was generated, I think, was because the people who had the control over whether that history came out or not actually didn't know themselves what the extent and the nature of Bristol's involvement was. And I think it's more fear than denial.
But in early March this year, the first sign of change appeared. Bristol's dignitaries gathered for the opening of a new footbridge. It was a small step, but a victory for the campaign to commemorate one of the slaves who lived in Bristol, a man called Pero Jones.
We are here with our friends to show our respect to our ancestors who lived and died in this city as enslaved Africans. It's often not known that in 1725, Bristol alone enslaved 16,550 Africans in that 1 year.
It's a bridge that helps us come to terms with, to understand, and sometimes to confront a shared past. A past that contains, for many of us, great sadness.
This moment is a sign that Britain is waking up to its slave trading history. Pero Jones belonged to a Bristol family, the Pinneys.